Just let me know when it looks like everyone is in.
Okay, we got 15 and climbing. Looks like we're paused for a little bit here on 22, so.
Okay.
Looks
Well,
like
in that
we're
case,
good.
I will call the meeting to order, and this is the special school board meeting, July 13th, 2020. And so first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you will join me in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Give me a second, I'll figure out how to unshare.
Okay.
Right up at the top, I think.
Yeah, my little panel's gone away.
Well, we'll go ahead and start while you take the flag down. The first item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. And so at this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as written or to modify it.
I will make a motion to adopt the agenda as written and attach it to the minutes.
All right, there's been a motion to adopt the agenda as written and attached to the minutes. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the agenda is adopted. So the first item is item 3.03, public comment. And during this time when we are conducting our meetings via video conferencing, we are accepting public comment through a portal on our district website or through email. Any such comments received prior to the board meeting will be read aloud at the meeting. Any comments that come in via the chat feature during the board meeting will be reviewed and addressed after the meeting. So we have 3 comments that I'll read that came in this week. The first is from Susan Duffner. And let's see. I'm sorry. Here, from Susan Duffner. I am a reading specialist at Central Elementary, and I attended the board meeting last night, June 30th. I wanted to thank the board for considering getting the advice and expertise of a financial advisor. As Dr. Quinn said, small districts typically don't do this, but if there was ever a need, this district could use the expertise. I also wanted to thank the board for putting the brakes on approval of the FEA contract until everyone is more informed about specific costs for 83% of the budget. It's prudent, and I applaud Melinda Long and Andrew McLaurin for insisting on more time. Thank you. The second comment is from Sherry McDaniel. BLM, Black Lives Matter, is using taxpayers' property / public property to promote Marxist, radical, and most likely violence at Ferndale High School. And then this comment came in this evening, late this afternoon rather, from Andrew Gustafson. Reading from your agenda tonight, ratify contract between the district and Ferndale Education Association. Questioning the wisdom in proceeding with the pay increase given the current climate and extenuating circumstances. The optics on this are very poor. Suggest tabling the increase for a year. We are bound to be in a much better position all around this time next year. Sincerely, Andrew Gustafson, taxpayer, FSD taxpayer. So thank you for the comments. And again, you can submit your comments either by email or on the district website or by the chat function tonight, and they will be addressed and we'll respond to them at a later date. So the next item is item 4.01. And this deals with the negotiated contract between the district and the Ferndale Education Association. We heard some of the features of the new contract at our June 30th meeting, but we asked the district to provide us more specific information about the financial impacts of the agreement. At this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to John Fairburn, Executive Director of Human Resources, to provide answers to the questions posed by the board. So, John?
Great. Thank you, Andrew. I've done exactly what you asked for, which was to put together some information to talk about what the impact of our new negotiated agreement on the district. Are you seeing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, like I told you,
Go back to the first screen, the first slide.
this is the first slide.
Okay.
As I said last time, there's OE4, which is the governance policy that looks at things like negotiated agreements, asks for two things. One is that we provide a competitive salary for our employees. And one of the big things in there is to create stability among our staff. And the second one is to do what is financially prudent. And so you asked me some questions on the financial end of the agreement. First thing you asked is how much of our salary in 2021 with the new negotiated agreement in percentages would be spent on FEA salaries versus last year. And it didn't change. From 1920, 33% of our budget was spent on FEA salaries, and that's also true in 2021 with the new agreement. Clearly, we're spending less on the salaries, and we're spending less overall, which is how you get the same percentage there. Second question I got asked was, how much does a 1.6% increase, because that seems like a very small increase, what's the financial impact? Financial impact of that with our currently budgeted staff is $389,095. To give you an idea kind of how that works out for an individual staff member, in 1920, a beginning salary for a teacher was $52,700, and that goes up to $53,558, or about $800 more. At the median, which isn't it's our median salary, not where our median teacher is. I'll explain that in a second. We go up about $100 a month. And at the top of the salary schedule, where our top people made $104,000 last year, that would go up to $105,710. I say that the median in our salary schedule isn't necessarily the median among our staff members, because we have a very experienced staff. We've got people that have been doing this for a long time. They've practiced this for quite some time. And so a large percentage of our staff is closer to this number than the beginning. The next one is cost of CTE, and this is a place that we're getting a little bit of cost savings. It was a rollback. It was something that the FEA agreed to. In 1920, the people at the beginning of our salary schedule for 1 day of CTE extra time received $294. The maximum was $566 or $75 an hour. In 2021, what we've agreed to was roll back the amount paid from the amount that we were paid this year to the amount that was paid in 17-18. And that's an important distinction, because it was in the summer of 2018 that the McCleary fix came in, and it put the TRS or professional responsibility stipend into the base salary, inflating the base salary significantly. What we've agreed to do is to go back to that 17-18 amount for anyone that currently has any extended days, and for anyone that is added, any days that are added, or any people that are replacing someone that retired or such, that we would go to the curriculum rate, which is $34 an hour currently. It's also a negotiated item for going forward. The cost savings of doing that is just over $38,000 for us. The next thing we did, it wasn't a cost saving, but it's a redistribution of the money within the contract. In 2019, 2020, we had 10 stipends for department chairs. Each one of those was worth about $8,100. Instead of doing that, what we've done is we have split it up to provide some instructional leadership across our schools. So there's still 20 small stipends that are available at the high school to do their department chair leadership and their instructional leadership. But then we've taken some of the money, about $32,000 of that, and distributed it equally or nearly equally between the middle and elementary schools to allow those guys to do some educational leadership as well. That money at the middle and elementary school aren't paid in stipends, are paid hourly at that curriculum rate that I talked to you about a second ago. And so the bottom line, I told you that the 1.6% salary increase is going to cost $389,000. We're going to save $38,000 on the extended day. That next line is employee premiums for a new law. And in some ways, I debated whether to put that on there or not, because we agreed to do this back in November when we negotiated the impact of the sub law for healthcare. We simply rolled that MOU into the new contract. And so it is a negotiated cost, but we were paying that through this spring as well. And then the last thing that has a cost value to it, which we can't define exactly, because it's based on the master schedule. Anyone that doesn't have their room available to do their planning at the high school will receive $100 per semester if they don't have that space to plan on, or plan in. And we think that's a maximum of $5,000. So the total of the bargain was $416,065 approximately. So I hope that helps with some of the questions that folks had. And I can certainly answer others as well.
So, John, thank you for this. This is great information, and I appreciate you getting it to us so we could look at it. In terms of, I know part of our concern is that we're in a different situation than other districts. My assumption is that there's certainly a piece of this that we're trying to keep our teachers as opposed to have them go to districts around us that are perhaps offering a higher increase. I think Bellingham is offering a higher increase. Is that correct?
Bellingham did a 3-year deal, and each year is about twice what we offered for this year alone. Most of the districts were more in the neighborhood of what we did, but Bellingham did considerably more. And also already the folks in Bellingham make about 5% more than we make.
Okay.
I just want to add that and I think we talked about this last time, but I want to repeat that the 1.6 number was not drawn out of a hat. That is a number, it's called IPD, implicit price deflator. It's a little bit like cost of living. That is the amount by which the state is increasing their apportionment to us. It is not required that we spend that on salaries, but it is expected by most, I think by the state and most employees, that that's where that money goes. It doesn't cover all of our FEA members because they're not all part of, but it does cover some of them, most of them.
I want to thank you very much for the emails that you went back and forth with me on with my questions. And, you know, now I'm responding in red and now look for the answers in green and my questions back to you in a different color. Looking at our emails back and forth, single space, there's 4 pages of asking questions and where does this come from? And, you know, can we afford this? And where are the savings? What does this mean for last year, this year, whatever? As a new school board member, you really helped explain it to me in a way that I feel confident that I can vote on it. And I very much appreciate that. I know as far as time-wise, back and forth, I work during the same hours you guys work, but my work does not pay me to do school board work. So me asking questions on your off time and you answering them, sometimes there's a lag back and forth, but I really appreciate the efforts of you answering all of my questions and putting this together so that it's clear for all of us and also the public to see. I think with that 1.6% increase and, you know, people asking questions with, well, how can you do an increase now? What we are going to be asking our teachers to do next year and how the change in what the work that, how they're going to have to pivot and be ready to pivot. And I think we've all learned this spring that the best people to teach our community's children are the teachers that we have, and we don't want to lose any of them. So while it is strange to be thinking of increases, if we think of the value that the teachers give us and that we need to keep them and we need to support them, then of course the 1.6% makes sense. Also knowing too that the state apportionment kind of builds that in. But anyway, I'm long-winded, so thank you.
Happy to help.
Other comments from board members? All right, if there are no other comments, I will entertain a motion.
So I would move to ratify the contract between the district and Ferndale Education Association as attached here too and made a part of the minutes.
All right, it has been moved that we ratify the contract between FSD and FEA as attached here too and made a part of the minutes. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, John. All right, so next, item 5.01, planning for reopening in the fall. At our June 30th meeting, our 2 executive directors of teaching and learning, Ms. Kelly Larrabee and Dr. Faye Britt, reported on a reopening task force they were putting together to review the guidance from the state, the health department, and labor and industries, and assist with making plans of how we will reopen our schools in Ferndale this fall. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Kelly and Faye to provide us with updates on this great work. So, Kelly and Faye.
Fantastic. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect for the work? Perfect. Okay. So as Andrew shared, the last time we were together, we were planning for a task force that we were going to create. And I'm really excited and pleased to announce that we have created our reopening task force, and we now have 58 members that are serving on our task force. So the purpose of our task force is to research, discuss, and develop reopening recommendations for the executive team and the school board. And when we talk about 58 participants, we are really excited about the group of individuals that volunteered and were eager to participate. We had over 80 applicants that wanted to be a part of this process. And so it was just amazing to see our community want to come together and be part of this process. And we ended up keeping quite a few more individuals than we had initially planned to. So as you can see, we have some community partners. And when we talk about community partners, we're talking about somebody from the Department of Health. We have somebody from the YMCA that's joining us. We have some students that are participating. We have 14 parents and guardians. We have school board members, district administrators, building administrators, certificated staff, and classified staff. And it was really challenging to select these applicants for this task force, but they had just incredible expertise in so many areas. So we ended up selecting individuals to participate that come from a variety of areas of expertise. And they also represent all of our schools, as well as a variety of ages and programs. So we were very mindful and intentional to try to create this task force that had this unique perspective. So although it was a little bit of a challenge, it was very exciting that we had our first meeting last week, and we had great attendance at our first meeting. I will say our first meeting was a lot of talking, which is not the intent moving forward, but we spent quite a bit of time really focusing on the guidance that we have been provided from OSPI, as well as reviewing community and staff survey results. Just engaging in quite a bit of foundational work to make sure we are all on the same page moving forward. We also asked all participants to participate in what we call a thought exchange. And we have used this at times within our Ferndale community. And this is kind of a busy slide, so I apologize. But what I'd like to show you is that we had 36 participants in our thought exchange. And once again, a thought exchange allows stakeholders to share thoughts, feedback, and ideas. It's open-ended and confidential, so people are allowed to share their own thoughts. And then they're also given the opportunity to rate the thoughts of others so we can start prioritizing that. So when we asked folks to participate in this thought exchange, we asked the question, what are the primary considerations and highest shared values that should guide us as we plan to reopen schools in Ferndale? So we really are trying to figure out what are our values as a team, as a task force, to help guide these efforts. And as you can see, there's a word cloud. And for those of you new to a word cloud, the larger the word, the more oftentimes it was mentioned or represented in these thoughts. So as you can see on this word cloud, health and safety have emerged as the #1 priority. So as we continue to work as a team and continue to wrestle with this challenging time and process, health and safety, and considering that as our fundamental #1 priority will be the work of this task force as we move forward in our planning efforts. And so I'm going to let Faye kind of guide you through that next step with that priority in mind.
Thanks, Kelly. As Kelly shared, our #1 priority for reopening is to ensure staff and student safety. We've really come to realize that we need to offer 3 pathways that really run simultaneously that meet the needs of all of our families, which one of those includes a full-time distance learning model. We're also looking at phased-in models, so bringing groups of students, either smaller groups or larger groups in at different times and phasing them in based on need. And we're looking at a hybrid model, which is more of a rotating schedule. So where some students will be in person in school, learning in school for a couple of days a week, and then participating in remote distance learning for the remainder of the week, and the groups would switch. We realized that we need all three variations in order to meet the multiple needs that we have within our community. But what the details look like really will kind of emerge in the next few weeks, and are really to be determined by input from the task force. What we also realize is any at-home learning, either the full-time distance learning or the hybrid distance learning model, will really look different to that from what it looked like in the spring. So part of this is from what we learned from our experiences, but also from the statutory requirements that have come out from OSPI and the OSPI guidance. So that distance learning, whether it's full-time or part-time, will still be bound by ensuring that we meet the instructional hours and days requirement. We'll still be responsible for attendance and enrollment, whether students are in or out of school. We're still responsible for assessing our students and where they're currently at, and then working on their growth and providing for their learning. And we have teams both at the elementary and the secondary level that are looking at the essential learning standards that we believe are critical for the fall. At elementary, that's our grade levels working together, and at secondary, that's our content, core content areas working together and identifying those standards. And then what will become more of a conversation as we move towards end of August, September, will be on grading and providing feedback to students on their learning. And so keeping that in mind, following our first task force meeting, we acknowledge the amount of preparation really for embarking on this challenge is really quite monumental. And because of the range of skills and experiences and knowledge that we have amongst our task force participants, we decided that our next meeting, we're going to break out into task force subgroups. And those subgroups will be able to dive deeper into targeted areas and targeted areas of need that we need to consider for reopening, based upon their expertise and based upon some collection of templates and questions and things that we really need to drill down and answer at a deeper level than just kind of the whole task force working together on the same thing. So those subgroups will include an equity and access group that will be looking at how we make sure that we're providing equitable opportunities and access for all of our students. Communication, because that's going to be key to making sure that we keep all of our stakeholders informed. Looking at facilities and operations, so cleaning protocols, how we provide meals, health and safety, all of the requirements of the CDC and Department of Health. And then a group that's looking at social and emotional learning of our students and how we meet their needs returning from very, very different experiences throughout this pandemic experience themselves. And then finally, an infrastructure group, which will be really drilling down on those three models I mentioned just a little bit ago. So our next steps, again, we identified our subgroups based on our participant feedback and expertise. And then we asked a collection of individuals to serve as our facilitators for each subgroup, again, based on their experience and their wealth of knowledge. And then we'll be really prioritizing the tasks and creating an action plan tomorrow. And this morning we held a meeting with our facilitators to really plan out tomorrow's meeting so that they feel prepared to lead their small subgroups. And I say small, they're not necessarily really small, but they're smaller than the size of 60 from the entire task force. And as we did last week, we'll be posting our recording of our meeting, and then also ensuring that we have notes from all of the breakout sessions and our subgroups, and sharing back out at the end so that we can kind of all know where people are thinking and what the group's really considering as some of their key priorities. That's where we're at as of right now. So if any of you have any questions, Kelly and I'd be happy to answer them.
Will some of the subgroups be even more subgrouped? Like I'm in the health and safety one, and I don't know, there's quite a lot of people on it. And I was just wondering if that's
that is a great question, Melinda. And actually that is one of the groups that we talked about the most, because health and safety and facilities and operations are going to kind of need to overlap a lot. But we decided tomorrow to stick together with the whole group, and then based on the action plan, maybe break out for transportation, break out for food service, based on maybe cleaning for our maintenance crew. So yes, definitely drilling down further.
And I just want to mention something else. We are right now developing these contingency plans. Mm-hmm. What we're not doing is planning for a normal opening. And when I say that, that's what we, I think, are prepared to do. That's what we've practiced year after year after year. And that's what we would hope to be able to have happen. But right now, we have to plan for those opportunities or models that we aren't necessarily as comfortable opening with, or as prepared as we are with our traditional model. So while we are planning these contingency models, it's very specific and intentional, as that is something we just haven't done as often. So in a perfect world, we would love to be opening schools with all of our students in the fall. But that we're not planning for that, just because that's what we're most familiar with, and that's our kind of our default. We can go to that and be prepared to do that.
Faye and Kelly, applaud the scope and what you've got there. That's awesome. The one question that I guess I have is, you know, you've got a plan there that has 3 different levels of, you know, learning. How I kind of get overwhelmed by the time frame, because I mean, realistically said, we're only, you know, less than 2 months away. Do we have the time to get all 3 levels figured out, or, you know, what is your game plan there?
That is a great question, Kevin. And yes, I think we really have to. You know, I don't think there is any hesitation there, that we recognize the need of our community, and we've just got to do it.
For us, it's really not an option. We will be ready. And what I will say, though, is we have an outstanding group of people around us, teachers, paraeducators, administrators, community members that have been so willing to be part of this. So even as we were closing down schools, we were starting to do some planning for the fall and do some training in the event that some of these models could be rolling out. So while it might look different than we're familiar with, we will be ready. Mm-hmm. But we will be relying heavily on our task force for support through that process.
What level of interdistrict cooperation sharing have you had? I mean, we've got, what, 7 districts within the county. Hopefully we're not all inventing the wheel separately, but hopefully there's some interaction between the 2, or the districts.
Well, we have a coalition that is existing, but it hasn't necessarily acted in the way in which we were hoping. We were really hoping to be on the same page and rolling out a plan that would be consistent, just because of the nature of us sharing kids. And it really hasn't evolved in that way. As you may have seen, and Faye and I spent quite a bit of time just before the meeting researching all of our surrounding partners, the plans that they're starting to roll out with, and they're very different. So while there is collaboration taking place, we have another countywide meeting. It isn't necessarily in the alignment of a schedule or a model. It's more, what I'm seeing is more maybe alignment of purchasing, talking about health guidance, which is important as well. It's just not necessarily as aligned with the scheduling.
How are you feeling about leadership from like state level? What sorts of things are you getting that are helpful, and what sorts of things do you really feel like, hey, state, you could step it up here? Because as school board members, we should be acting as, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, talking with the state legislators and saying, Ferndale needs this.
Mhm. I had heard that there was more guidance coming out. Today. I have not seen that yet. They have been talking about guidance for different populations like early learning or, perhaps, and maybe we're hoping here, on things like music and PE and some of those more complex situations that we know choir is, well, as of right now, what the science is telling us is that choir is a high transmittable activity because of the volume of singing and air motion. So hoping for things like that will give us more
Linda,
guidance.
I'm sharing with Kelly. I got kicked out of my office. Chris Reichdahl is had weekly webinars during the spring and is now having bi-weekly webinars, and we're having weekly meetings with ESD 189 superintendents. So I feel like and Faye's gone to a lot of those. I feel like there's communication. I don't think anybody has, like Faye said, there's questions that we need to get answered all the time. I don't think anybody is withholding or not working hard. And like Kevin said, it's a very short timeline. But we have no choice. We'll get it done. It won't be perfect. I guarantee, it won't be. We're reinventing the universe of education in 7 weeks. But I don't think that there's a lack of trying to be helpful from the state.
Good. That's understandable that, nobody has all the answers to everything, but at least the effort is definitely there. And
Yeah, the effort, yes, that's a good way to put it.
And I think I asked this last time, but just in terms of where we are right now, if there are federal funds that come to us, we still anticipate that the state will just subtract that from what we get so that we actually don't see any benefit from federal funds. Is that still correct?
We're hedging our bets on that. We're supposed to, at the end of this month, right, Mark, get a first installment of the CARES funds. It's an interesting dilemma because to get those, we're required to show basically receipts that we're spending them on COVID things, but we have been told that we have no guarantee that money won't be subtracted from our state apportionment at some time. Mm-hmm. So there is no answer to that. There's a historical precedence for that happening and some warnings that are coming that saying it could happen again. Once again, no evil people here, just state revenues are going to be substantially down. And when they're working on building our balancing their budgets, that's what happened in 2010, 9 and 10 with ARA funds, federal funds that came to us to help us get through the last recession were then just subtracted from state apportionment.
And I recognize, of course, the problems with the state budget and where things are going to be. I think, though, it's going to be important for us to keep that in the forefront for folks to understand if there's a big push about how much federal dollars districts are getting for our communities, to understand that money may well be just subtracted from what we would get from the state and leave us basically even with where we were before the funds came in. And I just think that's a message we need to keep in the forefront so folks understand that.
And I think it's fair to say, Mark, we haven't yet received $1. Is that true, Mark?
That is true.
So
that is true.
There's a lot of talk, but there's not been $1 of
Yeah.
COVID money come to the Ferndale School District yet. So we're being very cautious about that money.
Well, and the latest kind of advice is out of the financial end of OSPI is to not necessarily race to the front of the pay line for the COVID money, because the rules may be changing again coming up here shortly.
Thanks for that update.
And that's very true. I mean, based on the PPP stuff on the business side, they've changed the rules so many times that we
Multiple
have
times.
trouble keeping track.
Well, Faye and Kelly, thank you for your leadership on this, and we certainly appreciate all that you're doing. Are there other questions from board members?
I'm curious to hear from Kong and Avneet about words of wisdom, what you're hoping for, what you're afraid of. Student perspective, give it to me.
So like my biggest thing has been that it's my senior year, so like I do want to be at school, so that kind of, I don't know, so it's kind of been my biggest thing, is like just like wondering about like the whole like rotating, like how that'll work. But and then also I'm like confused about the grading, like how that'll work out.
I think Avneet, great. The COVID A has sunsetted. There's no more COVID A's. We'll be back into a more traditional grading system. So that's what I can tell you.
Okay.
Kong, any comments?
I don't think so, because like for now, all I can hope for is things gonna be slow down and normal, but right now everything is kind of like jumble.
You're right where we are.
And Linda,
Yes.
did any of those names go forward to Faye and
Jesse, they all went forward, and we sent out actually, Jesse, we asked Jesse, we didn't have any representatives of the Lummi Nation, so she rounded up 5 or 6 names. We actually have added three people from the Lummi Nation.
oh, thank you.
So I think we're good.
Oh, good. Thank you.
We've got representation. Well, thank you. Thank you for scrambling to help us find some people
Thank you.
and they're I think happy to serve. So
Yeah. Thank you.
So are there questions? Well, we'll look forward to an update in a couple weeks. So thank you. So the next item on the agenda is 5.02, report on the development of our 2021 budget. At our June 30th meeting, we heard a general overview of how the district is creating a balanced budget through a combination of cutting programs and personnel and using reserve funds. To provide additional information on the budget development process, I will call on Assistant Superintendent DeVos. Mark.
you're muted, Mark.
You're muted.
All right, that probably would make
There
my
you
presentation go much better, but I was working on the screen share. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint here. Should look a little bit familiar. So kind of start out with a little bit of a review that the budget is a pretty long, complex process that doesn't just kind of happen in the spring. That's typically when we talk about it the most, and we share start sharing more of the information. But we actually started this year a little earlier than October. If you recall, this was supposed to be year 2 of a kind of a revamp of the way we do our the way we're going about building our budgets. We reinvented all of the internal forms, the internal documents, and came up with a new process that we were going to use for building the budget in order to make sure that everything aligned with board goals and we could actually tie out the expenditures to the strategic commitments. It hasn't worked out quite as smoothly as we had hoped this year. In fact, just about everything we've done along the way, we've had to do at least a second time because of the nature of things, the way the world changed in February. So the real kind of significant work began internally in October in terms of actual work product, and that was a newly designed staff budgeting sheet that we distributed to all the building principals in November to get their feedback and get their information. We then kind of went through the standard enrollment forecast, figured out what our enrollment was going to be next year based on trend analysis, as we usually do. And then that turns into the staff allocation model. We figure out how much certificated staff and classified staff will need to support the number of students that generates, and that moves us then into the revenue forecast in February. And February is the month that everything kind of changed and started us scrambling and took us into the kind of the next steps of the budgeting process. So we figured out once we had our revenue, then we our forecasted revenue, we figured out, okay, if we do the same thing that we did this year, next year, what's it going to cost? And that then identified the amount of deficit that we're dealing with. And then we started talking about reductions, either reductions in staff or our MSOC, so our materials, supplies, and other costs. And realized that what we had identified through our process in February and March wasn't going to be sufficient to cover the gap. So we talked about last month using fund balance, fairly significant portion of fund balance to cover the remaining deficit. And that gets us to basically to the point where we are now of having a balanced budget, where we have a balanced budget on paper. Which we're required to do. So that's the good news. So you'll notice the deficit actually this meeting is a little higher than it was last meeting. Next month, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower, or at the end of the month, rather. We're fine tuning. We're into that point now where we're tweaking and identifying any areas that we can continue to save, reduce, or some things that maybe have been overlooked that need to get put back in. But we're very, very close at this point in terms of having a really good handle on where we're at in terms of expenditure. So that kind of brings us up to what we've done to this point. When we talked last month, you raised some concerns, right? And really good, valid concerns. You know, like as I opened, our budget is supposed to reflect the support of the strategic commitments. That's the goal. Literally put our money where our mouth is, spend the money on our values. So, you know, none of the cuts are, you know, very supportive of the board. I should say very few. There are a couple that I think are trimming expenditures where we could, whether we were going to pass whether we were cutting staff or making substantial cuts or not. There's some things that we could have tweaked that I would argue were in alignment with the core values. But most of them are not, right? And some of them were directly opposed. Some of the cuts around the equity and those sorts of things were pretty significantly opposed to what your stated values are. So you asked us to take a hard look at, you the board, right, asked us to take a look at what can we do? What, can we reevaluate some of the decisions that we've made and some of the reductions to get to where we are. So that's what we've done. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Thanks. I met with you earlier this spring and told you we were looking at how we could, you know, I think what I told you at the time is that when we determined the cuts that we might have to make in February, we thought we would be rerunning the levy in April, and we hoped we'd never have to make them. We started by looking at really what the levy funds, not necessarily what supports your values. And then we got struck by a pandemic. So some of our values and our needs changed. So we're currently in the process of trying to figure out how we can restructure whatever the resources that we have to identify 8 priority areas that are based on these 4 things. Guidance from the state, and by the state, I mean all of the agencies, Department of Health, everything, for reopening during the pandemic. Community and staff input we've received through 2 surveys administered this spring. The management functions necessary for the safe and legal operation of our school district, which we identified in consultation with our administrative team, and the values expressed by the board in your strategic commitments and your governance policies. So with that, we came up with 8 priorities, which you approved, I think in April. And I want to tell you what we're doing in each of those areas. They're not numbered here, but there are 8 slides and each one's a different priority. So the first priority, maintaining a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. We restored the position of Alvaro Vincente, who works with ELL. He does our Latino leadership and he's our Latino advisor. He was paid for out of levy funds. We have restructured our Title I funds to rehire Alvaro Vincente. And I'm going to say at the beginning that it's sort of a strange twist how this works. Title I funds cannot be used to supplant something you're already doing. So once we cut some of these positions, we were no longer doing them, and we could use Title I funds for those positions. They are justifiably Title I expenditures, but since we already had Alvaro in another kind of position, we couldn't supplant him. We have retained Lummi language and native leadership and cultural clubs with Title VI funds. We're exploring options for restoring Native advisors. And the options we're looking at, Project Aware grant that is controlled at the Lummi Nation, a new K-12 Tribal Heritage and Language Program grant that Faye and I are going to try to write, and then impact aid funds when we see how much we're going to get and if we're going to get impact aid funds. And then the last thing on this slide is we're maintaining our district equity team. Second priority, we're preserving our early learning work. We restored Rachel Bolden, who is a prof tech who works with Play and Learn and other pre-K programs. And once again, this was the case where we could restructure Title I funds to bring back Rachel. And we're currently working on getting 2 AmeriCorps volunteers. They're very inexpensive labor. We've had them in the past, but they're basically volunteers. We would be obligated to pay $4,000 stipend for each volunteer per year, and we can do that with either Title I or general funds, and they would be able to help Rachel with Play and Learn. Addressing students' social and emotional needs. We have figured out how to restore one full-time counseling position at each of our 5 elementary schools, which means 1 counselor for 5 days a week. What we had was, when we started making the cuts, we had 2 days of counseling at each elementary school. So this constitutes an additional 3.0 FTE in counseling. We're using Title I and high poverty funds for this. And two of our schools, Kelly, which one? Are Eagle Ridge and Central both qualify for high poverty dollars. And so we're using Title I for some of the rest of it. Providing an adequate level of administrative support in our school buildings. You saw some of this in talking about what John talked about today. We took the $81,710 previously spent on 10 department chair stipends at Ferndale High School, and we've split those up to provide dollars for principals at every level to pay staff to perform essential functions. So it's not going to be exactly what the department chairs did, but we've restructured that same money, and you saw that in John's presentation. And then the counselors that we've added at the elementary school, you know, when we made the cuts, we cut every support person from the elementary schools other than the administrative assistants. We had paraeducators who were working to support discipline. We had school support specialists. We had counselors. We had family and community coordinators. We cut all of those positions. In consultation with our principals, they decided that their first choice to come back would be to have the counselors who can help them in a variety of areas. Managing our technology program. You know, when we first made the cuts in February, we talked about maybe we would cut back on technology. Obviously, that priority changed. And I think we've talked to you about the fact that we've been involved in we've had an arrangement with Sitel, a Seattle-based technology support company. And Sitel really bailed us out 3 years ago when the company that we had as an outside technical support just sort of up and left us high and dry, basically. And so Sitel came in and helped us. We don't have people on staff who can manage a network as complicated and complex as ours. And so, but we hired Sitel, and they have been doing almost all of our technology support, and they're more costly than we think we could. Well, we thought we could restructure. So we did a thorough assessment of our current technology support program to discover how we could achieve efficiencies. So we're planning to enter into negotiations with Sitel to restructure our agreement with them based on this assessment. And they are not going to be, they're going to be willing partners in this. They also agree that their mission is not to do the level of individual computer support that we have had them doing. So even though you're going to see, or people are going to see, that we're putting out postings to hire 3 new FSD employees, we're going to be saving in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $400,000 when we restructure this agreement. Because so we're going to be hiring a couple of technicians, you know, the folks that fix your computers, and then one systems manager. And we're going to we've looked at ways that we can shift some technology support work to existing staff. We're going to be using some of the funds. The other thing that we cut that we had before were TOSAs, teachers on special assignment, who were helping other teachers with using Canvas or using Google Classroom or professional development. That's a good model, but it's an expensive model. We're going to use some of those stipends that John alluded to, or the hourly pay, to provide technology-related professional development mentoring on an hourly basis instead of a release time basis. And then the last thing is that we've been able to secure some non-paid interns from Watkins Community College to perform our summer cleanup and maintenance of student devices. There are a few other things, but these are the main things that we're working on right now with technology. Staffing the school board and the bond oversight committee, you know, those are functions that my administrative assistant Tammy Benjen did in the past, and we eliminated that position. So we've established a 5-person team to learn and oversee these functions. Mark and I, Aaron Vincent, Kelly Warner, and Tammy Longstaff. We have hired Kelly Warner, who's a FAW member. So, you know, different unions and different employee groups have different rules. So as a FAW member, we can't expect her to just add work out extra hours without paying her. So we've hired her on a personal services contract to staff school board meetings. And she will do that outside of her FAW work. John checked with FAW, they were fine with that. Staffing the school board is not considered FAW work. And then Tammy Longstaff, who's a Prof Tech employee, so not an hourly employee, is going to help staff the bond oversight committee right now as part of her duties. And then I think next slide, cleaning and sanitation guidelines. You know, part of our cut in February was we cut 5 SEIU positions, which amounted to a little less than 40 hours a day as a result of the levy failure. In the middle of the pandemic, that doesn't seem like such a good idea. We are still considering various options for addressing these cuts. So but we don't have a solution yet. And then the last slide, preserving some level of extracurricular opportunity for students. We probably talked about this one the most. We're using savings from not running athletics and activities in the spring to partially fund fall athletics. We're reinstating a pay-to-play fee for families who can afford it and soliciting scholarships for families who can't. We're transitioning middle school athletics from interscholastic to intramural. I don't think I put it on there, but we're maintaining some of the supplemental contracts for things like our drama coach and our marching band. I mean, we didn't cut those. Our coaches and community members are doing a one-time fundraising event to pay for C teams in sports. We've reached an agreement with the Ferndale High School student leaders that ASB will fund a half of an administrative assistant for athletics and activities. We did have a full-time person there. That is a legal expenditure for ASB funds. And then we're retaining a part-time athletic director, Eric Tripp, by basically giving him 2 jobs. He will also be assuming the responsibilities of one of the assistant principals. We'll be calling him a dean, but as well as doing his athletic director duties on the side. And I think that's the 8th slide, right, Mark? So I'm happy to entertain any questions. I think our plan in this budget development is to provide one more set of opportunities for you to weigh in and any kind of refinement at your July 28th meeting, and then ask you to adopt the budget at your August 18th meeting. As you know, we are legally required to present you with a balanced budget and that you can adopt by August 31st. We don't really like to wait until the last minute. So one more installment on July 28th of talking about where we are with the budget and a little more detailed breakdown, and then a vote. And we also are required to do, I don't know what it's going to look like in this format, but some form of a community hearing. On the same day. So anyway, I would be happy to entertain any questions, or Mark would, about any of that. Or Melinda?
I had a question on the equity slide of bringing back our advisors, which yes. I'm very happy about that. I was thinking though, given COVID and remote learning and how in the springtime it was difficult for some kids for different reasons to maintain connection with their teachers and such. Are we going to have, who's going to be responsible for reaching out to those kids to make sure that any sort of access due to technology or not being in the school, that we can keep those kids in the fold?
Well, I think that's interesting that you should say that, because Faye and I are in the process of somewhat rewriting the job descriptions for the Native advisors that haven't been hired back yet, to be a little more relevant to our current situation. So that would be partly, but we also had counselors in the spring who spent a good share of their time trying to make those kind of connections. So I'm not sure I can give you the exact protocol of how that's going to work yet, but it is on our list of things to figure out.
Other questions, comments?
I have a couple other, but I can wait if anybody else has.
I'll just say I appreciate the rethinking, and that this does more closely reflect the values that we have been working towards. So thank you very much for that.
And what I expected you to ask, I guess, is what aren't you doing with Title I funds now that you're doing, and some of it is a little bit of a one-time, because we didn't run a full-blown summer school this summer, and we usually use title funds for summer school. We did a ESY extended school year for some of our special education kids, and we did some credit retrieval at the high school. But we're also not filling some readings, we're not filling some positions that we've had as teacher support in other areas right now, and we're not doing some of the curriculum and other things. So we were looking in every corner for how we can put the money into people that we need to do that work. So Melinda, you had questions?
It was actually kind of related to that. So if we decided that the advisors were important to meet our goals, and we got them out of being funded by the levy, in the future, when our community is willing to better fund our schools, which they will, are we going to keep those advisors out of the levy fund so that they're, you might say, safer from the disaster?
That would be my intent, because it does, like I say, I think it's rethinking how we use the categorical funds, and we, in a weird sort of way, we have an opportunity here to do that, because like I told you, the rules say you can't supplant what you're already doing. Well, and it's not like, I'm just going to be perfectly honest, it's not like we went into this with a plan that was, I didn't really believe we would ever have to make all of these cuts, but once we did start thinking about the cuts that we'd made and then examining the rules, it allowed us to restructure our title funds and some of our LAP funds and our high poverty dollars in probably a way that better reflects what your values are and what we think are best practices, or know are best practices, I think. So I would never want to do this again, but in a weird sort of way, we have been able to realize, as Mark or John said, realize some ways to better utilize resources to meet priorities. Anything else?
Thank you. I was just to say thank you for all the hard work and for the reorganization. I mean, it's been nonstop for everyone for a long time, but it's really starting to gel, I think, in the plans that you're putting forth. So I appreciate that.
Well, I would echo Andrew's thanks just in your constant diligence to try and tweak things, you know, with everything else that's going on to really go after the goals and strategic commitments that we've put forth as a board.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you
Yes,
for
thank you.
answering my incessant questions.
Yeah, we had a good meeting last week. Faye and I and Jesse were part of it with some members of the Lummi Nation and some OSPI members from the Office of Native Education. So we have lots of people who are helping us on different parts of this. And thanks for your support on that, Jesse.
Yeah.
Once again, I think the conversation is going to lead us to a better place in, you know, just figuring some things out. So we're trying to find some wins in all of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, we've now reached the end of the agenda for our July 13th business meeting. Thank you all for your participation. Before I adjourn the meeting, I just want to ask the board and executive team if there are any other comments, questions, or announcements to be made.
So,
All right. Oh, yes.
I've got something. So while we've been in this strange virtual world, at the beginning of this, we were told that we were supposed to stick mainly to agenda items that had to happen to keep us moving forward. And now about a month ago, that shifted. And because this virtual world has kept continuing, we can expand that a little bit to other topics that might not be absolutely necessary, but may be important. And one thing that I have thought about for some time and I would like us to consider is, as part of our board meetings, doing a land acknowledgement of who were the original people on this land, whose land are we on with the Ferndale School District. And I would suggest that we work with the Lummi Nation to come up with the right words for that and make it part of our opening. So we do the Pledge of Allegiance every time, and I think when we get to that and liberty and justice for all, doing a land acknowledgement is important. It's important for us to remember. So I would hope at some point down the road we can start working on that.
Great suggestion. We have talked about that in the past, and it's an important piece for us in our community. So we can talk about how we put that on our agenda, Linda. And
I made a note.
thank you. Anyone else?
I would just say, oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Jesse.
I was just going to say thank you to Leanne for saying that.
I was just going to say that I've heard from Leanne and Melinda and Jesse about the WASDA conference, but not Andrew and Kevin. I don't know if you've given that any thought. And Kong and Avneet, let's make a plan to get a hold of each other this week. I haven't even sent it to you because I wanted to talk to you about that. But we were hoping to do some of the paperwork this week or early next week, if you know what you want to do. And so you can shoot me an email or a text or say you're still deliberating. That would be fine.
All right, will do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who participated in tonight's meeting. The next meeting of the Ferndale School Board is scheduled for Tuesday, July 28th at 7 p.m. Since the state has extended the changes in the Open Public Meeting Act rules through August 1st to ensure safe meetings during the pandemic, we will be holding our July 28th meeting in the same Zoom format as this one. Thanks again, and I hereby declare this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.